every breath you take, every move you make. I'll be watching you.
My wife and 5 kids moved into this old farmhouse in May of 2022. It sits on 8 acres of farmland and surrounded by more farmland. The house has changed owners a lot. That had me a little worried, but it's been peaceful. So I've even commented recently that it seems we don't have any haunting issues. Then, this happened. This morning my wife witnessed a tube of chapstick spin like a top on the linoleum kitchen floor. I heard it spinning. It was spinning fast. It sounded mechanical, it was so fast. Like a motor running. Prior to this, the only thing was my oldest son thinking he heard voices in the barn. But he was riding a quad in the field and passing by the barn, so I discounted this. We have a lot of animals, including cats and dogs. There's not been any weirdness other than this one event. It's always seemed peaceful here, and we have gotten comfortable living here. I'm worried about any type of escalation. Okay, the lights in the downstairs bathroom and the master closet flicker a lot, and the bathroom ones burn out. That may just be a wiring issue, and I've been worried about that. One more thing. My wife's best friend and her husband were sleeping in the shop, and he was leaving through the main door and says he felt something grab his arm and pull him back in. We figured that since their house was experiencing odd things like that, it was something attached to him and not our house. I bought a bundle of sage at a Navajo store in New Mexico a while back. I guess we might use it. I'm actually a little worried it might stir things up. We may just have to learn to live with whatever this is.
When I was around 12, I lived in a new high-rise building with my family that felt a little off. Several times when I was able to convince my parents that it's okay to go out and leave me to watch TV alone, I would start hearing voices coming from the direction of the bedrooms that were identical to my family members, as well as the distinct sounds of my mother's high heels, clear as day. There was also this one time where I woke up very early in the morning, walked over to the sitting room to watch a show that only aired at that particular time. 15 minutes after sitting on the sofa, I started hearing a knocking sound on the glass window a few meters behind me. Now, we lived 3 floors up. There were no trees or wires or anything that could touch the glass. No sill for birds to stand on, and no other buildings in front of the window either. The knocking kept going for a good 10 minutes, before it suddenly stopped. I was too terrified to turn and look. It never happened again, during that time, or any other time of day. The apartment also had a small guest bathroom that was shaped like a narrow corridor. When you stepped in, there were 2 sinks on your right, and a small room at the end of the door, with the toilet itself. That little room scared the bejesus out of everyone. It was fine when you were using it and in it, but the moment you turned your back or were leaving it, this intense sense of absolute fear would set in every fiber of your conscious being and scream, "Run." We moved out a year later, and thankfully never saw what was causing the noises. Still boggles my mind thinking about it, considering there was nothing on that land before the building was erected. Me and my brother are now both in our 30s, and the topic of the bathroom came up. Before I told him how I felt, he said he was also terrified of going in there, though no one ever said anything about it at the time.
I grew up in the 90s in Minnesota. My parents divorced when I was 8, and we spent every other weekend at my dad's haunted house in East Bethel. This house had every type of ghost you could think of. A shadow man in a trench coat and brimmed hat, another separate shadow figure that danced down the hallway, a man dressed to go fishing, a doppelganger of my father, 2 giggling little girl ghosts, and many other unseen entities. The dishwasher, radios and lights would turn themselves on and off randomly. Loud banging would be heard on walls and doors. Door handles would jiggle and turn on their own. Feelings of being touched or caressed in the shower were reported. My father also had an incident where he felt someone crawl into bed with him in the middle of the night when he was the only one home. My uncle reported hearing 2 little girls giggling and singing in the basement one night while sleeping downstairs. Upon awakening the next morning, he discovered there were no kids in the house that night. Also, there was a salamander plague one night. The entire yard was covered in slimy, slithering salamanders. It only ever happened once. Not positive if that is paranormal, but it's certainly strange. One sunny Saturday morning while visiting my dad, my brother and I were up early watching cartoons. I was 8 years old and my brother was 3. As we sat on the couch, we heard 3 knocking sounds on the wall 5 to 6 feet behind us. Knock, knock, knock. Our heads quickly snapped back to look at the wall where the sound was coming from, but we saw nothing. My brother and I quickly turned to look at each other with frightened eyes. I, being the older sister, tried to be brave. I told him it was nothing. As we turned our attention back to the cartoons, my little 8-year-old brain is spinning. What if the banging noise we just heard wasn't just the pipes, as I had been told so many times? What if it was a ghost? I hate when the ghosts come around. Why isn't my dad around whenever this happens? All these thoughts swirl in my head as we hear it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it is coming from somewhere in the kitchen to our left. It's not as loud as the first time, and the sound is different. Like someone is knocking on the kitchen counter this time instead of the wall. We quickly strain our necks to peek inside the kitchen with lightning speed, to catch whomever or whatever is making that noise. Again, there is nothing there. I take a deep breath. Once again I pretended to be brave and tell my brother, "It's nothing, just ignore it." My heart is thumping in my chest, and there are butterflies in my tummy as the familiar anxiety grows worse with each passing second. I tuck myself up on the couch in a ball, not wanting my legs to dangle off the edge. I no longer feel safe. Nothing is to be trusted. Knock, knock, knock. This time the sound is coming from the dining room. I can tell the noise is coming from the wooden dining table this time. I can see the entire table from where I'm sitting with ease, and there is nothing on the table that should be making that noise. No one except me and my brother are awake. There is no one in the dining room. There's no logical reason for this knocking noise that is moving around us. Just then I realize the knocking sounds have been moving in a big circle around us. If this invisible entity is to move any closer to us, the next logical place for it to be would be in the living room, where me and my brother are currently sitting. No sooner than that thought crossed my mind, it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the noise was coming from the coffee table, sitting less than 1 foot away from us. I instantly flip over the back of my couch in a reverse somersault-like motion and run at superhuman speed to my father's bedroom. In my panic, I completely left my little 3-year-old brother behind to fend for himself. Luckily, he wasn't too far behind. We sneak into our father's room and quietly lay on the floor. Our dad would have been super pissed if we woke him up early on a Saturday morning, even for a ghost. In our commotion, we wake up our 6-year-old sister, who is sleeping on our dad's floor. Us 3 kids always slept on his floor together when we were visiting. So we quietly whisper what just happened out in the living room to our sister. As we are telling her this story, something catches our eye. We can see a black shadow under the small space between the bottom of the door and the plush carpet. This black shadow is slowly pacing back and forth in the hallway, just on the other side of the bedroom door. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, like this shadow is waiting for us. Unfortunately, I don't remember what happened after this point. Somehow the rest of that memory has been lost with time. But I know for sure, we didn't open that door. As an adult, I often wish I would have been brave and opened the door. What would have been waiting? Would the entity have entered the room and attacked? Would we have been shocked and confused to find the hallway empty? Would the grey shadow just keep pacing the hallway, oblivious to our frightened, curious eyes? If you get this far, thank you for listening to my story. This was one of 3 of my personal, scariest experiences living in this house. I've done a lot of research on the home and property over the years, and can't find any evidence of any death or tragedy that would account for so much paranormal activity. I've also reached out to previous and current owners to see if they had any strange experiences. The 2 families who lived there previously said they never had any strange experiences. Neither did the family who lived there right after my family. The family currently living there did not respond to my questions, and in hindsight, I regret even asking them. It wasn't cool of me to even put that thought into their head. Prior to the home being built, all I can find is that the land the house sits on was part of a farm for a family that I could find little information on. So, was my family haunted? Were we all suffering from 12 plus years of mass hysteria?
This happened about 7-ish years ago, when I was 17 and living independently for the first time since leaving the local children's home. The building I lived in was a very old stone cottage that was once used as a pigsty before being converted. On a caravan site that used to be a farm, the place was always freezing cold and always had a weird vibe about it. And a bunch of odd things happened there. But this was the main thing that stuck with me by far. At some point while living there, probably around the 6-month mark, I lost my keys. It didn't matter to me much, because it was so out in the sticks in rural Wales, UK, that I felt I could confidently leave it unlocked, with no bother, and I was able to get spare keys for the other ones that were on the ring. While not being too worried or thinking that finding them was very urgent, I did search the place from top to bottom several times over the next 7 to 8 months, but never found them, nor did I come across them when I organized cupboards, drawers, or moved furniture around. They were completely gone. One morning I woke up around 10ish and came straight through to the kitchen. The place was a long rectangle with 4 rooms in a row from right to left, bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and a tiny hallway with front door, living room to make myself a coffee as usual. And there, right in the middle of the kitchen counter in front of the coffee pot and the kettle, as if I had just left them there the night before, were my keys. As you can imagine, I was floored by the perceived nonchalance these inanimate objects were just sitting there with, and instantly my thoughts turned to sleepwalking, downright forgetfulness, etc. But I knew in the back of my mind that none of these explained it. I went to grab them, and instantly dropped them because of the searing pain in my hand. They were hot, like metal baking trays straight out the oven hot, like they had been sitting under the sun on a corrugated metal roof all day in high summer heat. I made myself coffee, making sure not to touch them, and left them there all day and eventually picked them up and hung them on the hook next to the door, and didn't lose them again. Some other strange things that happened are as follows. I would sometimes hear a woman crying outside my window during winter, when there were no guests staying in the caravan or camping section of the park, which was in a different field anyway. Repeatedly, I'd wake up to find a suited man sitting on the end of my bed in the middle of the night. I'm not sure if it was a dream, but it never felt like one. Doors kept opening and closing that I knew were not opened or closed beforehand. Wardrobes being opened and things being dragged out of it while I was out of the room. This happened a lot, no matter how many things I stacked in there. The door on it was one of those that you had to push inward for it to release the catch and open outward, if you get what I mean. The TV would turn itself on and off, flickering lights and bulbs breaking way more than normal. Extra cold and hot spots throughout the building, which I often walked through or felt forming and disappearing next to me. I used to sleep with an electric blanket under my bottom sheet and 2 or 3 blankets on top of me, and occasionally would wake up freezing with 1 or 2 of the top layers on the other side of the bedroom. There was no way I could have kicked them that far in my sleep. Once I woke up with my bed a foot away from the wall. It was a diving bed with wheels. We are not in an area that experiences earthquakes or anything like that, so how did it move? I moved out when I was 17 and social services don't put kids there anymore due to some unrelated issues that I had with the landowner, which I am glad about in many respects. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in the comments.
I grew up in a very paranormally active home in East Bethel, Minnesota in the mid-90s. As I mentioned in my previous post, this house had every type of ghost you could think of. We experienced all kinds of unexplained electrical malfunctions, like the dishwasher starting itself, despite not being used in years, radios playing and changing functions seemingly on their own, and broken lights suddenly turning on by themselves for no apparent reason. There were also times there would be knocking on the walls and explosive pounding on the front door, all without any plausible cause. This particular incident occurred in the summer of 1997. I was 5 years old and was just about to turn 6. My younger sister and I were sleeping in what was supposed to be our big girl bedroom. It was a previously unused room in the basement my mum had decorated for us in a ballerina Barbie theme when she was expecting our baby brother. She wanted the new baby's room to be close to hers, so we were evicted from our cozy bedroom upstairs to the cold and neglected basement. My mum had added some Barbie sticker decals to the walls and splurged on a queen-size Barbie comforter and pillow shams to make the uncomfortable room seem more exciting to a 4 and 5-year-old. For some reason, me and my sister were sharing a bed in this new room, even though we had our own beds when we were in the upstairs room. Despite all of my mum's efforts and the assurance of my sister's physical proximity, the downstairs room always made me anxious. I would beg my little sister to let us keep our small television on for comfort, but she hated that staticky feeling that emitted from the television, that she seemed ultra-sensitive to. One early morning, between 3:30 and 3:45 a.m., I woke up to an eruption of chaos happening around me. The first thing I became aware of was that my little 5-year-old body was bouncing up and down off the mattress without my control. I was laying on my back with my arms slightly out to my sides. My knees were bent, sticking up in the air with my feet flat on the mattress. My body was bouncing as if someone was quickly jumping up and down repeatedly on the mattress very close to me, towards my feet. The next thing I noticed was how dark the room was. It was always dark when the TV and all the lights were off, but this was different. It was so dark, I couldn't make out the outline of the door opening, less than 10 feet away from us. Meanwhile, the FM radio clock, plugged in on the shelf above our heads, was playing an unknown song at a volume that I felt like it was going to shatter our eardrums. This unknown melody pierced the dark room like an alarm, causing panic and confusion. My sister was in the bed, laying on her side facing me. She was not bouncing up and down like I was. She was shaking my arm and crying. She was begging and pleading for me to wake up and make everything stop. Without even taking a moment to think about how or why any of this was happening, I sprang up to my feet, and while standing on the bed, I pulled the power cord of the radio from the wall. Silence immediately enveloped the dark room and seemed to bring calm. At the time, I didn't know the song that the clock radio had been screaming out, but as I grew up, I would learn that it was the Police's 1980s hit, Every Breath You Take. It took me 15 years after this experience to appreciate how creepy that song was, especially in the context of this event, in a home plagued by invisible entities.
Every breath you take, every move you make, every step you take, I'll be watching you.
After I unplugged the radio, somehow my little sister was able to go right back to sleep without so much as a peep about what we had just experienced. I don't remember doing so, but I know I went to my parents' bedroom that night and laid down on the floor on my mum's side of the bed. I remember just laying there, wondering what I had just experienced.
Having so much history myself with the paranormal, I don't freak out over creaks in the floor or the occasional door shutting on its own. I believe most things can be explained. When we first moved into this house in Washington 3 years ago, we saw a few random orbs here and there, nothing that felt harmful. In fact, one orb even danced to the music alongside my granddaughter one day, and it felt like a child. The house sits on acres of field, surrounded by forest and a few farms. For some reason, the guest room, laundry room and bathroom are always freezing cold, plus cool air comes from the guest bedroom closet. I keep a blanket hanging up in the hallway door to keep the cold isolated. I figure those rooms are just cold because they are added on and are built halfway over our well. I have my mother's ashes in my home, but at the same time I felt bad because when I was asked if I wanted my sister's ashes later, it scared me for some reason. I don't know why. She was a very loving person, but for many years I felt darkness around her, and I just couldn't. A year passed, and that fear left me. I remember her telling me one day before she died that she had a recurring dream of her death, and she was stuck in the desert. It then dawned on me that her ashes were being cared for by my daughter who lives in the desert. It was time to let her be here with Mum. After she arrived, her ashes were placed next to our mother's ashes outside my room, and like my mother, she was surrounded by some of her mementos. At first, there wasn't a problem, but after time, that's when the kids started seeing and experiencing things that made them feel uncomfortable. It didn't feel like my sister. This was something else. Strangely, absolutely no one in the family has felt her presence since she passed. I know my kids looked towards me for assurance. I guess they thought that, like in other homes, I could just make it all go away. But I think they stayed hidden from me in the beginning and preyed on those who showed fear. So it was targeting my grown kids, that being my son and his fiancée. I felt bad. I kept telling my son that there was nothing here and that our house wasn't haunted because we cleansed it after my sister passed away. Cody, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry for not wanting to believe you at the time. I was just trying to protect you and the kids from being scared. So there are a few things that have been happening in our home for the past few years. One late afternoon I was at the store, so my son and his fiancée were watching my 2 grandchildren for me. They were playing hide and seek. They told me something wasn't right in there. Each of them experienced what they said felt like someone or something taking up space within them in the closet, practically in their face. It had been a toy room in the beginning, but the kids wouldn't play in there. The only person who has ever slept there with no problem is my ex on a visit. He was a non-believer, until just the day when we were sitting in there watching a show together, and we observed his dog intently follow something move around the room. Then the bathroom door opened, and his dog watched whatever it was going to the bathroom, and the door shut behind it. At that point, his dog dove under the blanket. My ex's eyes were as big as saucers, and he asked me if I saw what he saw. Laughing inside at the former non-believer, I said yes. No one will ever sleep in there, not even me. 6 months ago, my son told me that he went into the kitchen to grab something to drink the night before, and he saw a dark shadow over his left shoulder in his reflection on the microwave. He turned around quickly to look behind him, and there was nothing there. He still felt something close to him, and the hair on his arm and neck were raised. So when he looked into his reflection this time in the window over the sink, and again, it was back, with its head even closer to his. Then the cabinet door shook back and forth, then opened all the way and shut. He said that he yelled, not caring if he woke anyone up, and ran upstairs to his room. I don't blame him. Many times he and his fiancée have seen big shadow masses in corners of various rooms, but never in my bedroom. Waiting outside my door, where my sister's ashes are, but never inside my room. There was a time not too long ago they were both sitting in my van talking one night, and they said the form of a man came out from behind a tree, crossed the grass, and sat with his hands in his lap on the front porch, and then faded away. Then they told me about the bathroom. Oh my, that bathroom. I can't even. His fiancée was taking a bath after everyone had gone to sleep, as to not disturb anyone. She was relaxing in our big old claw bathtub in the quiet of night, and she heard all of us sleeping, so she knew for a fact no one was up. There was a tapping on the bathroom door and she answered, to no response. The doorknob started to jiggle, then stopped, so she asked again, "Who is it? I'm in the tub." There was still no response. She thought that whoever it was decided to go to the other bathroom, so she relaxed, and she was laying there. But then something felt off, as she heard a noise at the door, and she watched as the doorknob slowly unlocked itself. When she told me that, my blood ran cold. This didn't just happen once. My son was sitting in there and he heard tapping, followed by the door unlocking on him too. The other day, my son said that he had gone to the bathroom around 3 in the morning. He knew everyone was asleep because he heard all of us snoring, so he didn't quite shut the door all the way, but it was closed. He heard heavy breathing as if someone had their mouth at the crack of the door. Then he heard a quiet voice whisper, "I can hear you." That poor boy was scared to death. I, for the first time, experienced the doorknob unlocking itself on me 3 times in a row in my bathroom last night. That surprised me. It has not always been bad experiences here though. Since my mother passed, I feel her sometimes around me. We all do. Just last month I was talking to my son in the living room, and I saw a light. We don't live near a street, so it wasn't from a car. It was soft and illuminating, as it floated from the front window curtain around to the wall behind my son. I got such a warm feeling and said, "Hey mama," and watched it as it went behind the recliner, where my son was sitting, and then up behind his head and disappeared. He didn't see this or know why I said that. Just then he shrugged his shoulders up and put his hands on the back of his head, saying that it felt like his hair was being stroked. That brought tears to both of us. We all know when she is here because it feels warm and loving, like her. And sometimes we smell her sweet perfume. My grandson, who is autistic, was too young to comprehend my mother's passing. He sometimes talks to her, almost like he is answering what seems to be a question. He is only 6 and has the purest soul. I wish I could hear her voice speak to me again. And then you have things that happen that at the time you didn't understand, but when you find out, everything falls into place. This was one such time. In March, I had a few aluminium balloons left over from my grandson's birthday, and they lasted a very long time. All of them fell to the floor except one particular balloon. It kept following me midway in the air around the house. The air conditioner nor heater was on, and all the windows were shut. I went to my bedroom, and it followed and stayed in my bed. I went into the laundry room, and it followed there as well. This went on for a solid week after a while. It just started getting annoying, but we didn't think anything of it. We just swatted it away. One day, my son and I were talking in the kitchen, and it came in from the living room, where we just saw it laying on the floor moments before and lowered itself to go under the door frame and stopped mid-height between us. He took it and pushed it back into the living room. Not 4 minutes later, and it was back mid-height between us. This time he put it all the way in the laundry room, and it still made its way back, lowering to come through 2 door frames and staying afloat midway between us again. At that point it was too weird. We both looked at each other and said, "Nah." So I took it and said, okay, if this is you, Mum, do it again. I put it back in the living room and it stayed there floating. It didn't feel like her at the moment. It felt different, almost familiar, but not in a bad way. We went back to talking, and there it was again between us. Well, I didn't know this at the time. In fact, I only just found out a few weeks ago that my dear friend passed away in March and his family didn't have my number to tell me. One of the last things he told me was that when he dies he was going to come harass me just for fun and let me know that he's here and he loves me. When I found out, I called out to my son saying, "It was Tom! It was Tom after all." After I told him the sad news, he said that it gave him a bit of peace. We all knew that this is something he would do, and it blew our minds. I just wish I found out then, so that I could have told him that I love him too. 3 nights ago, I saw a light low to the ground in the kitchen, and 5 minutes later my granddaughter saw the same light, formed like a feather, fluttering in front of her. My son also told me that a light trailed up over and across in his room. Another time he walked into my room and saw a light above my head. My neighbor is confident something happened on this land. I talked to him to see if he had been experiencing or seeing anything unusual without making myself look crazy. He said that he does not go out after dark, but he has heard the screams in the forest and his pets acting strangely from time to time. As we were talking, his roommate came home and asked me what we were talking about. When I told him, he pointed to the young man I was talking to first and said, "You see, I'm not nuts." Apparently, he had seen things as well and calls what he sees in his bedroom a demon boy, because he doesn't know what it is. He even saged in this room, and if you think about it, that goes along with the orb that danced with my granddaughter when we first moved in. And no, it's not a demon. I think that perhaps it's a child that connected or roams the property. We have seen so many beautiful things here that it outweighs the bad. Someday after I'm gone, I hope to be a part of it. I want to be the whisper of encouragement in my loved one's ears, and a gentle stroke upon their face. I want them to always know that they don't have to be afraid, and that they are, and always will be loved, from now until forever. As for what is in this house, I think since I have been more aware of the darkness, it shows itself less. I do enjoy feeling my loved ones around though, and my kids do too. Someday we will move from this place and hopefully one of our loved ones will follow. Today when I arrived home after running errands, my ex told me that without a doubt he saw something. At first I told him to stop playing around because I thought he was making fun of us. I've known this man for 24 years, so I know when he's serious. And this time he was definitely shaken. He said that he was standing in the guest room, and he was about to go into the bathroom to wash his hands, when someone tall, who he thought was my son, turned on the light and darted into the bathroom really fast, closing the door behind him. He waited for a bit, but didn't hear anything. He got tired of waiting, washed his hands in the kitchen, and still hadn't heard anything for a while. So we went to the door and asked if my son was okay, to not receive an answer, but the light was still on. He tentatively pushed open the door, to find nothing. Confused, he went to my son's room and knocked, and asked him why he did that and left the light on. But when my son came out of his room, he was wearing a burgundy shirt and pants. With a shake in his voice, my ex asked if he had changed his clothes, to which my son responds, "No, why?" The person my ex saw was wearing a blue t-shirt and shorts. My son told me that when he opened the door, my ex turned pale. On another occasion, my son's fiancée was in the kitchen today, and we are all putting away groceries. She has mid-length hair, and in front of everyone her hair flipped up like someone tossed it. It freaked her out and she said it gave her shivers. I promised my other son I would come help paint his new place, so I bathed my grandkids and made them something to eat. I figured I would only be gone a few hours, but it took way longer than expected. When I arrived, there were all kinds of commotions going on in my room, and my grandson was crying uncontrollably. No one could understand him because he was so upset, so he was trying to act out what just happened. After I calmed him down, he told me that he was getting tired and laid down. He said something woke him up, and he heard my car, so he went towards the bedroom door, when a dark hole formed at the top, outside my door, and a dark shadow boy thing came out of it. He said the boy stood in the doorway and pushed him back and slammed the baby gate, trapping him in the room. He said it was evil. He kept saying that over and over, "He's evil." After the gate shut, my grandson screamed, so everyone in the house ran to see what was wrong. I know kids have active imaginations, but I know him. He's autistic, and he doesn't lie or make things up. He was visibly shaken up, and since last night, his story hasn't changed.
Okay, so these are my experiences of when I was growing up in a house so blatantly haunted. My friends only ever stayed over once. Might as well start with the daily occurrences. For context, the house was raised, so we had garage and basically storage under the living space at ground level, so no animals walking on the ground and making noise in the house stuff. So we had the footsteps walking down the hall when there was only me in the house, the pantry door being open every morning. Dad would be up at like 4 a.m. to get ready for work and it would be open, so he'd close it and blamed it on me for some time. Okay, so on to the more wild stuff. I was hanging out with a mate of mine and we made our way back to my place and I realized I didn't have a key. So I asked him to just wait at the front door and I'd go to the back door. We never bothered to lock the back door because we had a neo-mastiff. So I went around back, walked up the stairs and opened the door into the kitchen, and directly in front of me was the T-intersecting hallway and a shadow projected onto the wall. So first, The sun was a solid 90 degrees to the side of where the shadow could be mine. Second, it was standing full height from the floor, and as I moved, it didn't. So I froze, and as my mind was processing what I was seeing, it turned and bolted towards the living room and front door. And yes, I both heard and felt the footfalls. So in that moment, my mind shifted from shadow to intruder, and I ran after it. I'm talking like 2 meters across the kitchen and about 3 to the living room. And I remember my friend was at the door waiting for me. So I just make for the door and realize there was nobody around. I opened the door and told my friend there might be someone hiding right here, so help me check. Nothing. Short one this time. Sitting at the computer around 1 or 2 a.m. Felt a hot breath blow across the back of my neck. Jumped out my skin with that one. I have 2 younger sisters, and I was watching TV with one of them in the living room and decided I had enough and was going to bed. So I got up and said goodnight, started walking to my room, and at the end of the hall was a young girl in white PJs. And I just thought that it was the younger sister. And so I gave no more thought for about 3 more steps till I reached her doorway, and she was sitting there playing a Naruto game on the old PS2. That's when I looked back up the hall and it was empty. I remember muttering, "Damn it, Bob," at this point. We had long since started calling the ghost Bob, just so we had something to call it. The fated friends night over, so not much happened for most of the night till we decided that it was bedtime. We were 19 at the time. Anyway, it was the following morning when I got up and went to the living room where my mate had slept, and he looked like hell. Our lights had an afterglow function so you could see for a few minutes after turning them off. Well, apparently, about an hour after I buggered off to go to bed, the lights clicked twice, and the blue glow clicked on, and that stirred him awake, thinking one of us was up. Then, the front door started rattling in the frame like someone was outside, pushing and pulling it. That eventually stopped, and not long after, he heard the footsteps going from the door down the hall and back for some time. He said he pulled the blanket up over his head when the door started banging and wasn't game enough to pull it down to see what was walking around. He flatly refused to stay a single night ever again in that house. This is just a snapshot of the shenanigans that we experienced in that house, but they are also the most memorable.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.